Hi, I'm Bob Gimlin. I exchanged emails and a long phone conversation with a credible witness. He had four experiences between 1972 and 1975. He was in his 20s at the time and is now retired from his practice on the East Coast. The experiences occurred when he was living in southern Georgia, south of Williamsburg. To the north is the Stephen C. Foster State Park, and to the south there is the John M. Bethea State Forest, running all the way into Florida. And then, of course, to the east is the infamous Okefenokee, North America's largest blackwater swamp. The witness has fished, backpacked, and hunted throughout his entire life. Throughout all of our correspondence, the witness struck me as entirely credible. Had I even suspected a red flag, this video would not exist. And despite my best effort, the witness declined to record the story in his own words, which is his right. In all his years in the wilderness, the only four inexplicable events he ever witnessed took place on the trials and tributaries of the Suwannee River. He was alone for all of them, on his bass boat. His bass boat was aluminum, which you didn't see as much of back then. It was 7 a.m. and the sun had begun to rise, already over 70 degrees, hotter than usual for early April, and the reptiles were already on the move. There weren't any other cars at the parking lot of the launch. The witness was alone, on a connecting stream that narrowed as he progressed. Moving toward shore in either direction would result in a trolling motor nightmare, but this is where our witness preferred to fish for bass. A fallen tree partially blocked his way, and as he maneuvered around it, he saw what he thought was a plastic bag snagged in a tree. But it wasn't. On a branch the width of his thumb were three, quote, cottonmouths, what I call water moccasin. They were all, quote, tied in a simple overhand knot. Tied in identical fashion, right beside each other on the same branch. The heads were facing the water, opposite the shore, and the tails were facing the shore from which the tree fell. Two of the cottonmouth were, quote, average to small size, lacking the formidable girth that large, matured individuals exhibit, and the third was, quote, the biggest cottonmouth I'd ever seen or saw since. The largest had the tail end of a partially digested fish sticking out of its mouth, as snakes will regurgitate their last meal in times of stress to aid an escape. One of the two smaller snakes was still writhing and swallowing, as a snake's neural response can persist long after respiration terminates. He thinks that the snakes must have been still alive when they were tied so securely that they were unable to break the bonds of their own cord. The longer he looked at it, the stranger it became. The snakes were unbroken, not a single bruise, cut, break, or blood drop between them, yet tied so securely that they seemed to have the same fluidity of rope or hose, as if every single vertebrae was identically dislocated. In our dialogue, he referred to it as, quote, art. When I questioned him on the use of the word art, he replied, that's really what it was. It was the only thing I could call it. Over 45 years have passed since the witness found the artifact, and I could still hear excitement and wonder in his voice. He grew up catching rat snakes and even kept a corn snake as a pet for a number of his teen years. And yet, he had no idea how the snakes were, quote, tied so snug that they couldn't wriggle free or, apparently, breathe. No apparent injury, nothing conflictingly bent, bruised, or broken. He snapped the branch from its adjoining limb. The snakes would have had to have been tied on the spot. There were too many sticks forking off the branch to simply loop the snakes around. The light film of pond scum of the water's surface was undisturbed ahead of him, and the path his boat had parted had not even begun to close. He guessed no one had been down this way in at least 6 hours. They didn't stink. This happened recently. Leaving the chilling possibility that there was no boat, and that it came out of the surrounding woods and into the water. He said that if there was no boat involved in placing the snakes, then whoever did it must have been treading water, unless they were very, very tall. A culmination of these realizations caused him to grow uneasy. In a moment of revulsion, he dropped the art and watched it sink into the black water. Now why would you do that? I asked. He said with a shaky laugh, I just didn't want to look at it anymore. I asked if he regretted dumping the snakes. He said no, what was I going to do with 3 dead snakes? Today, though, I would have taken its picture. It seems the logistics of it all really freaked him out. Capturing 3 venomous water viper and wading or paddling into the swamp water at night, a time when splashing is particularly not recommended. He further scrutinized the area, but found nothing else out of the ordinary. A lot of time, effort, and risk went into creating the art, and he feared the artist may not be thrilled about its destruction. He felt watched and decided to call it a day. That evening, he told a bartender about the find. She said, yeah, everyone's got a story of spooky stuff happening out there. The very next day, he got onto the water, a little later this time because you know how it goes. His work schedule would grow demanding soon, and he wanted to get as much time on the water as he could. His curiosity insisted upon it. It had rained that night, and the waterways had widened a bit, making the going faster. He wasn't the only one on the water that day. He recalls a duckboat, a pair of canoers, and a star craft that he envied. He trolled to the fallen tree and the branch of the art. Nothing was out of the ordinary. Years before these occurrences in the witness's youth, he claims to have hooked but failed to land a bowfin that he claimed was every bit of 15 pounds, which in the 70s would have been a record-breaking specimen. The environment was exactly like where he almost caught that monster, so he began casting his lure beside the grass and pulling it in. He liked bowfin because of their explosive hits and rod-bending staying power. They don't let go, and they don't give up, he said. He had no luck with bowfin, but some attention from bass, who were more interested in escorting the lure rather than biting it. Insects chirped, frogs croaked. There was no wind to stir the grass. The water was still before the stillness broke. The witness didn't see it go up, but he saw it come down. A rock hit the water behind his boat. The impact was so close that it misted his face, and drops broke on the brim of his hat like rain. He went still, no trolling motor, listening and waiting, but it was again completely placid, as if the water tension was entirely unbroken. Just bugs and frogs. He saw the stone come down in a straight trajectory, as opposed to from the sides. He described it in size and shape as a gallon of milk. A gallon of milk weighs about 8.5 pounds. Rock, on average, is 2.5 times heavier than milk. The witness was obviously disturbed by whatever would be strong enough to arc such a weighty projectile, but what disturbed him even more was that it didn't do anything. Sometimes the scariest thing that can happen is nothing. The rock thrower would at a minimum have been in ankle-deep water among the grasses. Dry land was too far away to have thrown anything from. The witness didn't hear so much as a frog breaking the surface, let alone heavy feet through water. It was holding its position. It was still there. The witness could only conclude that a creature of considerable strength was literally less than a stone's throw away, motionless, crouched, quiet, and totally confident in its concealment. The witness had a .38 special in the red toolbox that he used for tackle. It wasn't for animals. He was raised not to fear animals, and in turn, they fear you. But he was afraid that day. After floating in silence for what he believes was about 30 minutes, he turned around. He passed a woman in a canoe. He considered warning her, but had no idea what he would say. He returned regularly and had no more odd experiences for over 2 years. Not until the summer of 1974. Our witness was aware of alligator slides. He watched for slides because he had yet to catch a glimpse of the elusive 15-footers you often hear about but never actually see for yourself. He guessed he was 6 miles up the river from the rock and the snakes, nearing the border of Stephen C. Foster Park. Even 2 years of nothing failed to deter his curiosity. The scene looked something like this. A large, long dead tree jutted over the water from the bank of the river. It was partially buried in the bank and had been there for a long time, smoothed and bleached by the elements. Beneath the trunk, on the shore, the witness saw unusual alligator tracks. The alligator was probably between 5 and 6 feet long. Certainly not large by alligator standards, but still a formidable animal. The tracks indicated that the alligator was dragged out of the water by its haunches, as there were no tracks from the hind feet, which presumably were held too high for the claws to gain purchase. Only the foreclaws left tracks, and they dug into the mud, trying to pull itself back into the water, to no effect. There were also indentations from where the reptile's snout bashed into the mud, presumably in unsuccessful attempts to strike behind at his attacker. Other than wading birds, these were the only prints present. The witness concluded that a creature shimmied onto the log to do some fishing that night. It seems as though whatever grabbed the hapless reptile had a reach of over 4 feet, longer if the alligator was submerged. The creature then must have reversed down the log, pulling its prey all the way to firm earth at the end of the trunk, before dismounting the tree trunk and continuing on dry land with thick ground cover. The alligator was grabbed by the haunches from above, pulled out of the water, unable to drag itself back in, and unable to deter its assailant. The witness said the log would have been ideal for a spear fisherman who didn't want to enter the water or have a boat. I would add that it may be ideal for something that didn't want to leave tracks in the mud. I asked if he had given any thought to documenting these occurrences. He said no, he wasn't out to prove anything to anyone. He was just curious. The witness also notes that he likely would not have given the tracks a second thought, were he not already cognizant of unusual activity in the area. His final encounter occurred late in the summer of 1975. He had to be at work by 4:30 in the morning, so on his days off, he would often be on the water before sunrise. It was dark, but not too dark to see. The witness heard an explosive crash through the water, and deep, low noises that he still has not decided whether or not they were vocalizations or the sloshing suction noise of a flat foot through mud. From about 90 feet, he saw an upright figure accelerate into the brush. He describes it as wider than a refrigerator. It was the color of corrugated cardboard, though appeared darker in the pre-sunrise shade of the cypress swamp. This boxy description is consistent with something like this: being upright. He saw it for a fraction of a second before it put enough grass and trees between itself and the witness, and he heard it longer than he saw it. The creature made it to dry land in what the witness says was no more than 5 bounds, and about 40 feet. The witness does what I probably wouldn't have done. He steered straight for the grass he saw the creature take off from, and began to remove his shoes and socks. From the bottom of his toolbox, he drew his flashlight and pistol, which since the rock incident had matured from a .38 to a .44. When the boat could go no further, he entered the knee-deep water that shallowed with every step. Clutching the flashlight against the .44, he tried to recreate the creature's path, but finding tracks proved impossible, as the swamp sucked up every footfall. Not that you could even see through the black water in the first place. Nor could he tell exactly where the creature made dry land, but it must have jumped a considerable distance from the water's edge to the firm earth and debris of the forest floor, as there were no prints in the mud between them. And he thinks this jump may have been the noise he heard. The witness said, quote, "A tracker probably would have found something, but nothing looked different to me. The water steamed like smoke." He would routinely frequent the area for an additional 2 years, at which point the witness moved out of state. He would continue his passion for the outdoors in the Northeast, and later, with regular trips to Florida. But he had no more unordinary occurrences since Georgia, 1975. I asked the witness what he thought of the 3 knotted snakes, if he believed that they had any meaning. The witness felt that the snakes, or art, was some kind of retribution for one of the alleged Sasquatch being bitten by a venomous snake, as if to send a message. Possibly, but I think it represents a turf marker, like a flag. These creatures would constantly be on the lookout for venomous snakes. Scanning for this distinct pattern and others like it would be second nature and habitual to them. And perhaps the patterns stick out to them like colorful stripes do to us. Basically, if a creature sees that display, They know that it can only mean that others of their kind have been through the area recently. The witness didn't seem all that surprised by this find. He had grown convinced of capable and intelligent creatures living out there, and he knew they had to eat. Though I'm not convinced that this was merely a predatory activity. The conifer forests and cypress swamp basin, coupled with the evergreen oak forests of the highlands, provide more than enough low-risk calories to sustain large creatures. Going after an alligator must have meant something. Craig Stanford, a professor of biological sciences and anthropology at University of Southern California, asserts that meat hunted by chimpanzee is used with, quote, nepotism and strategy, to strengthen social bonds with some individuals, and just as importantly, damage bonds among other individuals. And this is not unique to non-human primates. If you want to divide a group of friends, pay half of them more and see if they're still united. Meat holds great significance in non-human primates as well as human primates, so Sasquatch must be no exception. Catching this was not merely predatory. It meant something. Though the witness insists that alligators are surprisingly harmless if you know what you're doing. I agree in theory, but not necessarily in practice. I asked if we can rule out a hoax. He thought this was funny. He said, hoax what? If it was a hoax, they sure didn't want anyone to see it. I asked the witness if he had asked other people in the area about strange encounters. He said he did, but they were mostly, quote, ghost stories. He doesn't know if other people were having similar experiences and not saying anything, or if he was the only one and was just very lucky. I asked if he regretted leaving the area, essentially abandoning a treasure trove of informational and literal wealth. He said no. He has a wife and children, who now have children themselves, complete with a dog and white picket fence, and he doesn't believe that would have been possible if he dedicated his life to monster hunting in a swamp. He said this is kind of a, quote, all-or-nothing affair. You're in or you're out. I know what he means. Anyhow, make sure you like this video, subscribe for more content, and as always, thanks an awful lot for listening.